Thoughts like, that looks familiar, or I remember, isn't this the place where this and that happened? Are something you'd usually connect with the experience of playing a game for a second or third time. But in the post-apocalyptic third-person RPG we will look into this time, it's a bit different. In this case, it's enough to have played the predecessor to be able to potentially remember dozens of previously visited locations. And with that, this game is also building more upon its predecessor than most other games. And so, in this review, we will have a look at Elex 2, released in 2022. Developed by the German studio Piranha Bytes, which was already responsible for the Gothic series, and published by THQ Nordic. And we will not just answer the question whether the game is any good, but also whether you should definitely have played Elex 1 before checking out this game, or if you should even ignore one of the two games because they're just all the same. And without further ado, let's get to the intro, and with that to the new dangers which await us in Maglan. After we rescued the world from a faction of cold-hearted humans called the Alps in the first game, we have to fight against an alien threat this time around. Spread all over the country, these purple aliens built small stations which are similar to extractors of the Alps in the first game. We are taking the role of Jax again, an ex-commander of this Alp faction who got infected right at the start, which in the long term should transform him into some purple alien guy himself. So our goals are finding a cure and trying to convince the different factions to work together, as that's the only way they will be able to have a chance of surviving against this new alien threat and to save the world. And while our goals appear to make sense and to be logical, the explanation how it got to this new starting situation seems to be quite far-fetched. After we rescued the world with Jax before, he apparently tried to convince the people that there's a new lurking danger and that preparations should be made. But nobody wanted to listen, and so he withdrew from the public, left his partner and child and spent years in solidarity in his mountain hut. That is, until the aliens arrived, doing so by pretty much landing right onto, or well, into his new home. While we will encounter lots of people who are actually remembering Jax, the majority just forgot about him. And if it was like 20 or 30 years ago, then sure, that might be somewhat believable. But in this case it's not even 10 years, and so this whole setup feels a bit weird. And of course the fact that Jax also suddenly forgot how to use all his abilities, either by the infection or by other means, doesn't help to make it more believable either. The accessible area in Elex 2 is overlapping with the one of its predecessor by about 50%. The southern part moved quite a bit to the east, which means that in the southeast of Elex 2 you will also find completely new areas, like some city ruins on a hill, which actually got some big underground bunker which is housing the Morcons, a new faction in Elex 2. They survived the apocalypse in that bunker and are now contributing to the world with a new fanatical worldview. That said, the fanatism of the other four factions you can join this time faded away quite a bit. The area already known from Elex 1 also went through some significant changes though. For example, in Elex 1, the headquarters of the Outlaws were on top of a hill in the desert, but in the story since Elex 1 it had been taken over by the Berserkers, which then also used their world-hard magic to turn the desert into fertile grassland. And similarly, the other factions also found a new home in this altered world map. The clerics were pushed out of their mountainous lava region and they are now occupying a small castle. And this lava region in the north pretty much froze over, and now the headquarters of the Orbs can be found there. By the way, the substance called Elex, which the game is named after, reached the planet via a meteorite in the backstory of Elex 1, and since then it's being used as currency as well as some kind of drug, which among other implications on the story also led to the cold-hearted Alps faction. Together with the arrival of the purple aliens, we also got a new material on the planet now, which has been named Dark Elex, and of course we will explore about the ramifications of that new material within the story of Elex 2. Of course, we could dive even deeper into the history and its development since the first part, but I think you already got the picture at this point. So there's generally a lot of completely new stuff to explore, while the game also massively builds on top of the story and environment of its predecessor, so that old players will feel right at home in Elex 2 and will recognize plenty of the characters and locations, even if they went through some changes in the meanwhile. In my opinion, it's a pretty cool idea to do it that way, but of course all these changes make it even less believable that this should all have happened just within a couple of years. And while I will talk about the exploration in more detail later, it's also a bit strange if we explore the same story choice in Elex 2 as we did in Elex 1 and now find a bunch of loot in there again. So either the Jacks from the first part must have missed all of that, or somebody must have ran around to stock up new stuff for us to loot. And if you just finished Elex 1 before you start with Elex 2, so that your memories of the first part are still fresh, you could potentially also get problems in keeping memories of both games apart, and you might think that you already explored a certain area even though that memory you are thinking of was actually from the previous game. Similarly as Elex 1, Elex 2 also offers plenty of quests and opportunities for decisions. As usual with RPGs, these mostly just have effects on the quest itself though, or the characters involved in that quest.
Oh shit. Almost lost my lunch.
However, the decision of which faction we are joining has some bigger impact of course, and in difference to Elex 1 we can even decide to stay neutral this time. Like in Elex 1, we also got a character stat reflecting our alignment, which is called Destruction this time, and which is mostly increased and lowered by our quest decisions, unless of course we just run around and butcher friendly NPCs. An especially high or low value is only really necessary for very rare occasions though. The decisions we make in the quests also influence our reputation towards our companions we got active at the time, which again also have their own quest lines. But there are a couple of discrepancies. Some of their behavior in their own quest lines just didn't make any sense, and also how they judge our decisions felt quite random at times, mostly as companions which were more on the evil or baddie side. In the end, the best you can do to maximize that reputation is to avoid making decisions which are not to their liking while they are active. So if that happens, you might want to reload and temporarily remove that companion or exchange him or her for someone else. The inactive companions will then stay and wait in our own base, which besides of that doesn't really have much of a relevance in terms of game mechanics. By the way, our companions are pretty much hands-off, so we can neither access their abilities nor their inventory. The currently active companion will also join into conversations now and then, even if that is not his or her own quest line. Of course, this is just a cosmetical thing, but it's always nice and sometimes quite funny to see.
Sounds like you didn't gut that rat properly. Or maybe you didn't cook it thoroughly.
You have to gut them. That explains why it tasted like actual shit.
How do you know it's No, never mind. I don't want to know.
And with this dialogue, you can also see the type of language used in Elex 2. Actually, Piranha Bytes is somewhat known for their rough style of language in the German originals, but unfortunately the localized English version is more vulgar, the voice actors are much less convincing, and in total the game loses quite a bit of its humor. While the game does take itself seriously for the most part, there's also quite a bit of dry humor, at least in the German original. But here's another snippet, which in the German version is actually quite funny, also thanks to the great voice acting, and in English it's, well, kinda mediocre, but see for yourself.
I solemnly pledge to protect the seedlings, watch over them as they grow, and to assume personal responsibility if they do not.
To protect the seedlings, watch over them as they grow, and, something about responsibility.
Close enough. Let's get to the important part. Do you pledge to remain loyal to the Lord of this community?
I suppose so.
Just say yes, or we'll never get this over with.
Yes.
Will you follow his commands and never question him?
Yes.
Then I hereby declare you a member of our community.
And then we got the quest log, where basically everything just gets thrown together. Open quests are on the top, below that you got the notes found so far, and at the bottom are finished quests, all sorted by the name of the region, which isn't super useful in general, but especially useless in the beginning when you got no idea about the region names. When we select a quest marker will show us where to find the target and where to hand in the finished quests. Actually, that last part is only true in most cases. Now and then we will complete a quest simply by killing a quest target and not by handling in the quests. And then obviously the question arises, what to do now? Where to continue the quest line? Which NPC should we speak to? And searching for the completed quest in the journal, which doesn't have a filter option, will just be painful. Especially if you didn't catch the name of the quests. While this doesn't happen that often, it happens often enough to be annoying. There's even a whole line of quests where this happens at every single step, so you really got to keep an eye on that. Regarding the design and the dialogues, the quests are very well done for the most part, and they spend significantly more effort into embedding them into the game world than you would assume. A great example for that is Scrappy, for whom we have to hire some new personnel to work in the mines. Once we did that, Scrappy doesn't just vanish and reappear in the mines. Instead, he runs to the local inn, where the recruited miners already gathered. Then he is holding a short speech in front of them before they finally start running together to their new workplace.
Now listen up. We're about to head down into the mine. You'll need something to eat, sleep, fight with, and take the edge off. Last one's optional, I guess. Tools are already down there. And just don't forget, the mine's chock full of gas, so change your filters out often, okay? Alright, let's go then.
And things like these you will encounter quite a few times in the game, which help to make the game feel quite alive. Exploring the world in Elex 2 is quite fun as well again, and one of the big strengths of the game. The world is designed with much detail, and you will find something interesting almost everywhere, pretty much like in Bethesda's Fallout games. Whether these are just cosmetical things, like a room in an abandoned house, which was apparently used for some occult rituals, judging by the shrine and the severed hand, or like written notes or voice recordings. Or, of course, more mechanically relevant things, such as special weapons, potions which will permanently improve the character, or pieces of a treasure map which will be displayed on a big board in our base. And in addition to that, we of course got everything which you would probably take for granted. Plenty of items which can be sold, consumed or used in the crafting system, which unfortunately is rather pointless in the game. And we got chests and safes which we can lockpick and hack if we have the right skills and manage to solve the logic-based minigames, which I found to be rather pleasant. You can even set special markers on the map to keep track of locations you want to come back to. The terrain on the world map is fully visible right from the start, by the way, and when exploring, only symbols for teleporters and NPCs are getting added. But that means that there's no kind of fog of war, which means that you would need to try to memorize locations you already explored before. We are moving around in this world in the third-person perspective, as we did before, which I personally don't like, as it usually goes along with nicer looking animations for the cost of rather inaccurate controls, at least if you're playing with keyboard and mouse. And of course, that's the case here as well. And so it might happen that you bump into furniture every now and then, or accidentally fall off some cliff or something similar. Luckily, this doesn't necessarily lead to death, as we also got our jetpack again, which was already available in Elex 1, and used for flying very short distances, especially vertical ones. In Elex 2, this jetpack can also be further improved. If we're investing enough learning points and material, we can't just fly much higher with that thing, but also become more agile in the air, and can even shoot ourselves forward, which is great for traveling over medium distances. For long distances, we still have the teleporter quick travel at our disposal. While slight adjustments had been made to the combat, including the removal of the very strange melee attack combination mechanic from the first game, combat still doesn't feel particularly good, mainly due to the before mentioned unprecise controls. And like in Elex 1, melee combat is not going to be a valid option on higher difficulties. The character is just too fragile, while at the same time melee relies on very good controls. As before, our companions are of big help in the combat, at least in the first half of the game. While they can go unconscious, and they will always get back up after a short while, and they will bind the enemies onto them to some degree, so that we can beat them up, or even better, shoot them to smithereens from a safe distance. Unfortunately, it's quite apparent that one type of ranged weapons is by far stronger than all the other ones, which reduces the effective number of viable weapons quite a bit after a while. And as the best weapons can be found somewhere in the world, you are basically drowned in healing potions and creating ammo is highly inefficient. That also means that the crafting system isn't really that interesting and mostly reduced to just creating Elex potions, which will improve the character permanently. Speaking of character development, by killing enemies and completing quests we will gain experience points which, as usual, will lead to level ups, and from these we get 10 attribute points and 1 learning point each. Attribute points can be invested into the 5 attributes Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, Intelligence and Cunning, and the more points you put into them, the more future increases will cost, until it finally reaches the maximum of 5 attribute points for 1 point of gain. These attributes have multiple uses. First of all, they got a direct impact. For each 5 points in Constitution, we are getting additional hit points, and for each 5 points in Dexterity, the ranged combat damage will increase. An additional use is to unlock additional dialogue options. These, however, are very rare exceptions.
Doesn't everyone have a choice who they work for?
The most important 2 effects are to meet the requirements of weapons on the one hand and learnable abilities on the other. In Elex 2 there are a whole bunch of abilities we can learn which mostly bring passive bonuses. For example, we could learn an ability which increases the damage we do with bows, or one which would make it easier or even possible to pick some locks. And also the expansions for the Jetpack need to be learned before they can be used, and all of that will of course cost learning points. Depending on which faction we are joining, this will then also make other abilities available, which still have to be learned though. The whole character system is extremely free and you really don't need to worry about increasing something incorrectly or ending up being inefficient. There's no level cap in the game and new enemies will keep popping up in the open world, so that in theory you could have an unlimited amount of level ups. Furthermore, you will also be able to craft potions out of Elex and Dark Elex, which will then give you additional attribute points, learning points, or even increase the attributes directly, which, by the way, does not interfere with the costs, meaning that you also don't need to put them aside until you reach a certain attribute level. If you explore everything and do all the quests, you will end up with a character at the end of the game whose attributes will have met all the requirements for weapons and abilities, and who will also have learned all the accessible abilities in the game. Or at least all the useful ones. With other words, no matter what you decide for, in the long run it won't matter much. But of course you can set priorities to learn and increase these things which will actually support your gaming style. You can probably also compare Elex 2 with Fallout 4 in that regard. Personally, I think the character system works quite well. In case of a potential second playthrough, though I don't think the game has a lot of potential for that, there is still the option to choose a different faction, which will then not only give you a different set of quests to do, but also give you access to a couple of different abilities to learn. And because the choice of what to increase first does have some real impact for the first half of the game, it doesn't feel like the system is just meaningless. Even if it feels like the sole purpose of the attributes is just to serve as unlocking weapons and abilities.
The interests of an individual count for nothing. Only the goal has meaning.
Regarding the weapons, you got a pretty good choice in theory, but the balancing is rather bad and I don't see how you would take anything but this one weapon type, which is just so much stronger than anything else. Regarding equipment, your choice isn't even good in theory. You will hardly find any armor lying around in the world. You can buy a couple of items at vendors, but the good stuff is only accessible once you join a faction. There you would get access to a few better sets of armor once you rise in the ranks, but that's also fairly limited. Overall, not really a problem, but I think they wasted potential here. Lastly, we will have a quick look into technical aspects. In terms of graphics, I'd say that the game is slightly better than its predecessor, but that's also a bit down to taste. Generally, the game looks quite nice, however the quality of the faces, as well as the display of faraway objects, won't exactly blow you away. The music I'd consider as good to very good, and here and there I was actually happy when certain tracks were played again. You might have read the one or another thing about the bad performance of the game. Since release there had been one patch which improved the situation quite a bit. While there are still some people with complaints, I don't have these myself. That said, I do have a problem in combination with my recording tool OBS, which has weird problems with this game specifically. While the game itself runs perfectly fine for me, once I start recording, OBS is causing quite a slowdown without actually reaching any limits in terms of hardware. While this review video is also framerate capped, I ask you to take the performance you're seeing here with a grain of salt. If I wasn't recording, it would actually be smoother. During my playthrough, which took about 100 hours on the highest difficulty, I experienced about 10 crashes, which I think is still acceptable. I also rarely encountered any critical bugs. The only noteworthy one is causing a side quest to not be doable, but fortunately that's the rare exception. And with that, we are getting to the conclusion. While the story transition from Elex 1 over to Elex 2 has a bit of a problem in regards of plausibility, and some quests aren't exactly convincing and they kind of degrade in quality closer to the end, I think the story overall is rather well done. It's a bit of a shame that the English localization is way inferior to the German original. It's not full of errors, but where the original has lots of humor and properly directed voiceovers, the English version is just bland in comparison and has almost nothing of the humor left. The issues with the Questlog aren't as much of a problem, although it's still annoying to handle and to find any resolved quests. Character development feels nice for the most part, but loses relevance after about the first half of the game, and that's also true for most of the item system. Despite of all that, the exploration aspect is the biggest strength of the game in my opinion. Because even if a lot of the items you're going to find aren't super relevant, there are still some left which do have some value for the player, and besides of that, it's also just fun to explore and discover all the locations the developers put together in so much detail. If you are traveling around in the world, it just feels like it's somewhat alive, and it's not just consisting of different spots which were designed to tie quests together.
I'm aware that I might have been not that fair to you recently.
Recently? Try never.
You can often see that the developers went an extra step when they implemented these quests, really making them part of the game world. While neither the controls nor the combat is great, they are manageable and they aren't really standing in the way to enjoy the game. My overall rating for the English version of Elex 2 is a 3/4 thumbs up. And I'm explicitly mentioning the language, as I think that the significantly better dialogues in the German version push that one towards the full thumbs up rating. Still, if you're mostly looking for exploration and doing quests in a vast open world, then Elex 2 should be just the right game for you. If you're mostly interested into character development, combat and loot, then this game is probably not your best choice. And with that, let's get back to the question from the beginning regarding whether you need to play Elex 1 before you play Elex 2, or if you should even skip one of both games. Elex 2 is a very clear continuation of Elex 1, with almost identical strengths and weaknesses. While you could in theory play Elex 2 without any prior knowledge of Elex 1, there are tons of references you will not understand, and in my opinion that means in this case that you will miss out quite a bit. And therefore I would definitely recommend to play Elex 1 first. If you then don't enjoy Elex 1, you will also not enjoy Elex 2. But if you do have a lot of fun playing Elex 1, then Elex 2 is a clear recommendation as well. If you just finished playing Elex 1 though, then I would recommend to first take a break of a few months and put it on your wishlist instead. Otherwise you might suffer from oversaturation and you might get confused regarding your memory and possibly leave out areas as you remember them to be done already, even though that memory was actually still from playing the first game. So ideally you also wait for a sale and then your wallet will thank you as well. I hope I've been able to give you a good overview of the game, and if that's the case, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up. While I started out with my German channels, I added this English one to also offer reviews, previews and some occasional let's plays in the English language. So if you are interested into seeing more content here, then consider subscribing to this channel, showing me that there's a demand for English versions. If you're interested into seeing what other games I played so far during my 40 years, then check out my webpage at ndnw.net. Make sure to uncheck the filter for reviews to see all the games I played. While the linked videos are mostly German, you will find an English description and some screenshots to all the games. Thank you for watching this review. I will return to very important detective work now. I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.
And the footprints prove it. I have to go tell my friends about this. You'll have to guard the bottles while I'm gone.
And how long do I have to guard them for?
Oh, until they're secure. Yeah. So you can't move now, okay? You're the bottle guard. Bye!
Don't run away from me. Well, great. Now I have to keep watching over this trash. Let's see when he comes back. Yep, this is what it's come to. I'm actually guarding bottles.
Hey, is that your mess?
You talking about the bottles?
What else would I be talking about? Does this look like an outlaw camp? You can't leave garbage lying around. Clean it up.
They're not mine.
So you just happen to be standing right next to them, huh?
This kid asked me to make sure no one touched them.
You handing out alcohol to children?
Calm down, it's just a game.
Oh, so you think getting kids drunk is a game? What the hell's wrong with you? You're lucky I'm off duty. But I won't forget your face. Oh yeah, gonna keep an eye on you. Giving alcohol to kids. Unbelievable.